action is morally good insofar as it is possible in relation to every will and every inclination. Immanuel Kant. In a previous lecture, I talked about Kant's concept of freedom. And I said that to him, freedom does not mean acting on your whims. It does not mean doing whatever you desire without questioning why you desire it, where that desire comes from, if you really should desire that. Freedom doesn't mean the ability to choose between good and evil, because why would we want to choose evil if we understand that it is evil? No, freedom means the ability to do that which is good, that which we ourselves have understood to be good. Because calling something good and saying this should be done, this should happen, is one and the same. So you would only contradict yourself, you would only be in a sort of opposition to yourself if you both at the same time judged something to be good but still didn't do it. The important point was to Kant that there is no lawlessness in the world. Nothing ever happens without a law. And even if it did, that would not be freedom, that would just be randomness, arbitrariness, and therefore worthlessness. So freedom doesn't mean that our action is not determined by a law. What it means is that there is no heteronomy, so there is no law from the outside being imposed on us by nature. So that means that freedom in the negative sense is being free from our drives. Not free in the sense of not having them, but free in the sense of not having to follow them. So I can, even if I feel hunger, sure, the feeling will be there, but I can decide to not eat for whatever reasons, even for non-moral reasons, like when I'm fasting or dieting, but also for moral reasons. I can go on a hunger strike to protest or whatever. So that would be negative freedom, not being bound by the law of nature, not being bound to my own drives, not being a slave to my sensuality. But again, since nothing is completely lawless and random, if I don't follow the law of nature, I have to follow another law. And if I am to be free, that other law can, of course, not be a law imposed on me again from the outside, because that again would be heteronomy. But rather, freedom means autonomy. So freedom means that I give a law to myself through my own reason. I have spontaneity. I have self-activeness. I can, through reason, have insight into, once again, what is evil and what is good, what should not be done, what should be done. And through that, I can determine myself. And that law I give myself through reason, that is the moral law. And this is what leads us to the categorical imperative. I already gave a lecture on the imperatives in general, where I said that according to Kant, there are 3 different types of imperatives. So our reason gives us instructions what to do, but those instructions can be just hypothetical imperatives, whether they are imperatives of skill that go towards any purpose, any goal we might have, or whether it's the imperatives of prudence that are about reaching the specific purpose of happiness, which we actually do have. But all hypothetical imperatives have in common that here reason says, if you have this goal, X, you need to use these means, Y, to reach it. If you don't have that goal, you also don't need to do whatever I advise you. You don't need these means. And therefore, this is precisely a case of heteronomy. This is reason serving as an instrument in the pursuit of some purpose which reason, didn't decide. In the categorical imperative, this is different. Here, reason doesn't just tell me how I could reach a certain goal that I might or might not have, but rather here reason also sets the goal. Here reason is not just an instrument, but here reason is, so to say, the ruler, setting the course. Well, I advise you to check out these lectures on freedom, on the imperatives, but now the question is, what exactly does the categorical imperative say? I said what it is, I said that it is the moral law and that we give it to ourselves and that this is what freedom actually means, but what does it actually say? What is it to be moral? What actions would a moral person undertake and what actions wouldn't he undertake? And the categorical imperative is, of course, one of the most well-known elements of Kant's philosophy. If you have ever heard anything about Kant, you have likely heard that there is such a thing as the categorical imperative. It gets talked about a lot when people talk about Kant, so unlike with some other parts of his philosophy, there are lots of texts, lots of videos, lots of explanations out there already. But unfortunately, it is often misunderstood or at least not understood fully, and lots of explanations are somewhat distorting or somewhat misleading. The first thing that I want to point out is that there are certain wordings of the categorical imperative that are often thrown around. In Kant's writings, and even more so if you don't limit yourself to Kant, but also go to others to other thinkers who refer to the categorical imperative, like Fichte, there are many different versions of the categorical imperative, many different formulations. What is important and what Kant himself stresses is that there really is only the one categorical imperative. These different wordings don't constitute different categorical imperatives. They are therefore also not in conflict with each other, like they don't give different moral instructions. They also don't expand on one another. It's not that one of the wordings really includes content that the other doesn't or whatever. They are really just different wordings of the same thing, of one and the same moral law. It is important in philosophy to be able to distinguish between the letter and the spirit. The letter is just what is written. Again, it's the wording. But you mustn't be stuck to the letter. You mustn't slavishly follow the letter. You also mustn't misunderstand the letter in a way that goes against the spirit that is meant by that. Our thinking is something alive. The moment we turn it into words, the moment we write it down on paper or speak it in a lecture, as Nietzsche was fond to point out, it loses part of its life. So you as the reader have to give that life back to it. It has to have life in yourself, otherwise the dead letter, you will misunderstand it. What Kant therefore points out is that we must distinguish between the categorical imperative as such and its formulas. I mean, compare this with the Pythagorean theorem in mathematics. I can, of course, use the formula that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But that is not the Pythagorean theorem. That is its formula. I mean, the ancient Greeks, so Pythagoras wasn't actually the one who came up with it, it was known before, but that aside, when the ancient Greeks talked about it, they didn't know that formula. They didn't know what a squared plus b squared is. They didn't use to do geometry in that way, use variables, use letters like a and b. But still they knew the Pythagorean theorem, just not in that formula. The point is that the same sort of how I can calculate the side of a right triangle through using the other two sides, that same sort I can also express in other ways. Sure, I can say a squared plus b squared is c squared. I could also say that if I take a right triangle and I draw squares on the two shorter sides, then those two squares taken together are equally big as the square I can draw on the longer side. That would be a different way of expressing it, using completely different words than a squared plus b squared is c squared, but it would still be the same thing, content-wise. So it's different only in the wording, and that's important to tell that apart. When it comes to the categorical imperative, a lot of the variations that can be found throughout Kant's work are really just very small variations in wording that don't matter much. And there would be no use in talking about each of them. There are, however, 3 different actual variations that Kant himself points out that are important and that I do want to address. All the other variations, once again, they are really just small variations in wording of these 3 basic different formulas. Why is there 3 different formulas? Well, if you understand anything about Kant, or if you followed these lectures of mine at all, you will know that to Kant, science must be systematic. Science mustn't be just an aggregate. Science needs to be organic. And therefore, he says there needs to be an architectonic in science. I already gave a lecture on Kant's architectonic method. It means you start from a principle, you start from an idea, and the different parts follow by necessity. They, so to say, grow out of or emanate from that principle. So to Kant, it's important to not just come up with different ways of expressing the categorical imperative, because if you did that, okay, then you could end up with 3, but who's to say that there couldn't be a 4th way of expressing the imperative that you just didn't think of? Or who's to say, on the other hand, that there shouldn't just be 2? And you named 3, but just because 2 of the formulas you named actually could be reduced to 1 and the same. Kant always tries to be architectonic, and his architectonic in turn is based on the table of categories, or the table of judgments from which the categories come, both of which I discussed in their own lectures already. Because Kant says that there are 12 functions of judgment. So there are 12 forms, so to say, in which we can judge. And all our thinking, because thinking in the end is making judgments, all our thinking happens within these 12 forms. And from those 12 judgments arise the 12 categories. So 12, so to say, basic concepts of our intellect. And everything we think has to happen within these 12 concepts. And that is precisely why this table of categories of these 12 concepts is always the basis for Kant's architectonic. If everything we can possibly think as humans has to be sorted in these 12 categories, then every science, of course, also has to be structured alongside those 12 categories. And so there are 3 formulas of the categorical imperative because Kant bases them on the categories of quantity. And those are, of course, again, I explained all of that in more detail in the lecture on the table of categories. But those are, of course, unity, plurality, and totality. And therefore, there are also 3 formulas of the imperative, one of unity, one of plurality, one of totality. Because what Kant is saying is that you can look at the categorical imperative from an objective side. That would give you the one of unity. Or from a subjective side. That would give you the one of plurality. Or you can combine both, the objective and the subjective perspective. That would give you the one of totality. The categorical imperative is an instruction for how we should act. And such an instruction can be about 2 things, or must be about 2 things at the same time. Objectively, Kant says, it is about the rule according to which we should act, the rule that our action should follow. Therefore, it is about the form of the action. Subjectively, it is about the purpose the action should have. So, what is the action about? What do we try to achieve? And that would be the matter, so the content of the action. And again, if you combine both, the form and the matter of the action, the rule which it follows, and the purpose which it tries to achieve, that would give you the 3rd formula of the categorical imperative. And this rule that it follows, which constitutes the first version of the categorical imperative, the one connected to the category of unity, would be to give our actions a form of lawfulness, a form that could serve as the form of a natural law. While the second version of the categorical imperative, the one connected to the category of plurality, the one that is subjective and about the matter of our action, would be that the purpose of all our actions, the highest purpose, should always be humanity, and all other purposes should be subjected to that purpose in itself. And again, the third formula of the imperative combines them both. It tells us to think of ourselves as a being of purpose, giving a law for a realm, for a kingdom of beings of purpose. All of that might sound very abstract and hard to understand. That is why I want to get into more detail and to explain all three of these formulas in detail. However, before I do so, I just want to stress that this architectonic is really important. It is important to Kant. Therefore, it is important to me when talking about Kant. And you really don't understand Kant if you don't follow his architectonic, because then it's just, well, as if he's making up random things, presenting random thoughts or random formulations of the categorical imperative, which individually might be interesting, might be true, but you fail to see the whole. You fail to see the organic connection between them. You fail to see that which is really at the core of reason, of rational thinking, and that is necessity. Randomness, arbitrariness, is the opposite of reason. Rationality is about necessity. What is rational must be that way and cannot be another way. And that is what is important to Kant. And unfortunately, that is often overlooked. Admittedly, it is easy to overlook if you just read one or two works of Kant and don't read, like I did, all of Kant to take in the whole picture. But unfortunately, often when people talk about Kant, and when it comes to this topic, when people talk about the categorical imperative, they treat these different formulations, if they mention them at all, and don't just stick with the one that is most well known, as if they were just random. And they don't see that it is necessary, because they follow the three categories of quantity, it is necessary for there to be these three. To just give one kind of anecdotal example of what I'm saying, you can go to the Wikipedia article of the categorical imperative, and there you will find that it says that there are 4 formulations of the categorical imperative in Kant. That is, however, wrong. Kant, if you read the groundworks to the metaphysics of morals, Kant very explicitly says that there are 3, and that there must be 3 because they follow the 3 categories of quantity. There are not 4 categories of quantity, there are 3. So how could there then be 4 categorical imperatives? Whoever wrote that Wikipedia article clearly didn't read Kant properly, or I don't know, the source that he based the Wikipedia article on didn't read Kant properly. In fact, the 4 categorical imperatives that are named on Wikipedia, they got the first 2 right, and the third formula they kind of split into 2 different formulas. Like they just took 2 variations of Kant's and treated them as if they were more than just variations in wording. What is funny is that this is the English article on the categorical imperative. If you went to the German article, it also says that there are 4 categorical imperatives, but they don't name the same 4 that the English article names. So they both got the number wrong, but they both got it wrong in different ways. In the German article, it's not that they split the third version into 2. No, they list all 3 versions correctly. And then for the 4th, they list the types of the categorical imperative. I will get into what that is in a moment. It's basically just, it's a help in applying the imperative, but it is not itself a 4th version of the imperative. Kant is very explicit about that. So both get that wrong. And to add to that, the German Wikipedia article, after listing the 4 alleged imperatives, also claims that to this day, Kant scholars still haven't found out what the relation between those four is, whether they are all in the end the same content-wise when it comes to the moral instruction they give, or whether they are different. Well, I don't know what Kant scholars this article is referring to, but they can't be very good Kant scholars if they haven't found that out to this day. Because that was clear even in Kant's own day. He very clearly, again in the groundworks to the metaphysics of morals, says there are three formulations, but they all, despite their different wording, in the end say the same. They all lead to the same judgment on what is good, what is evil, what ought to be done, what ought not to be done. And it is just important to me to point that out. You really have to be careful. Often when people talk about Kant, like the Wikipedia article, specific things they say might be correct. I'm not saying that everything they claim about Kant is wrong, that they completely misunderstood him in all the details, but just they don't get the bigger picture because they fail to take into account his architectonic thinking. But with that, let's get into the categorical imperative, and let's get into the first formula, the one once again connected to the category of unity, the one that is the objective one, the one that is about the form of our actions. And this is also the most well-known, the most prominent formulation of the categorical imperative, the one that you are most likely to hear when Kant is discussed. And it says, act only according to that maxim, through which you can also want for it to become a universal law. This might sound quite complicated, because of the scholarly language that Kant uses, but you will find that actually it is not that complicated once it is explained. What we need to understand here is, on the one hand, what a law is, and on the other hand, what a maxim is, because again, the imperative just tells us that the maxim of our action should be such that it could also be a universal law. Well, both a law and a maxim to Kant mean a principle of action. So both of them are like a general statement that determines the way we act or the way we should act. The difference is that a law is an objective principle of action. So a law is one that everyone has to follow, right? Think of the law in the state, or think of the law of nature. It is there for everyone, and everyone is subjected to it. So if we were pure rational beings like God, and I explained that further in my lecture on what is freedom, then we would follow the moral law, the objective moral law. There would be no duty for us, no imperative, no shall, because what we should do would be what we already want to do. So there would be no place for a should. But since we are also sensual beings, since we also can act against the moral law, there are also maxims. And by a maxim, Kant understands a subjective principle of action. So when you do something, when you act, then you, whether consciously or not, you are acting according to a maxim, according to your own subjective principle. And the maxim as such could be anything. You could say, I want to have regard, I want to have reverence for other people's property. But you could also say, if there's something I want to have, and if I can get it without repercussion, without getting caught, then I will take it. Then I will steal it even if it's others' property. Or you could say, I always want to speak the truth, no matter whether it benefits me or not. Or you could say, I always want to look out for my own benefit, so if it benefits me, I will lie, I will trick other people. Or you could say, I want to treat everyone equally. Or on the other hand, you could say, I want to look out mainly for myself or for my own group, be it my family, my nation, my race, whatever. All of these could be maxims, and certainly are maxims that some people follow. What the categorical imperative says now is that we should only follow a maxim in our actions that could qualify to be a universal law. In other words, to be something that is objective, something that everyone follows. And to make this more understandable or more applicable, Kant, in the critique of practical reason, offers what he calls the type of the moral law. And the type of the moral law is that we should always act in a manner that our will, that the principle it sets, again, the maxim that we follow, could become a law of nature. So I should basically ask myself, what I'm doing here right now, what if that became a law of nature? In other words, I mean, what is the law of nature? What is gravity, for example? It is something that everybody follows, that everybody is forced to follow even. So basically the question should be, what if everybody acted the way I act right now? And as Kant says, that is, you don't need to be a philosopher, you don't need to be a scholar to understand this principle. That is indeed what common everyday people also say in their moral judgment, right? Oh, what if everybody acted in that way? Think of where that would get us if everybody acted the way you do. Well, that is precisely the question we should ask ourselves. This type of the moral law, I already mentioned that sometimes, including by the German Wikipedia article, it gets confused with another basic formulation of the categorical imperative. But no, it is its type. It serves a similar role as the schema serves in the process of cognition. I already gave a lecture on the schematism and the principles. I advise you to check it out. Basically, the point is this. For Kant, and this goes through all of his philosophy, this is a red thread in his philosophy. For Kant, there's always the problem that if you have two elements that in their nature are entirely different, like oil and water, then they can't mix. They can't be connected. Unless you have a third which sort of bridges the divide between them, which allows you to connect them. Again, this is an important theme in Kant's philosophy. For example, to him, philosophy is theoretical philosophy, the philosophy of nature, of being, and practical philosophy, the philosophy of freedom, of the Schal, of the moral law. But between them, you have the aesthetics. Between them, you have the pleasure we take in the beautiful and in the sublime. Between them, you have the concept of our power of judgment, of purposiveness. And with that concept, you sort of get out of nature into freedom. You sort of look at the realm of nature as if it was the realm of freedom. If you don't understand that too well, check out my lectures on what is beauty. And likewise, in his philosophy of cognition, in his epistemology, Kant talks about the need for a schematism of our power of imagination. Because Kant says that we have sensuality and we have the intellect. We have our thinking. Through our senses, we get certain impressions. Colors we see, sounds we hear, feelings we feel, whatever. And these, our power of imagination sort of combines, it apprehends them. I gave a lecture on the apprehension already. It apprehends them and turns them into an image, into a perception. However, now I'm seeing something or hearing something or whatever, but I don't know what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing. I need a concept. I need to understand what it is I'm faced with. And I need to understand the rules that it follows. And these concepts, they come from our intellect. And Kant explains that there are these 12 basic concepts, the categories, that our intellect doesn't take out of experience, but rather that come from our intellect and that we give to experience. But the problem is that these 12 categories such as causality or such as substance and accidents, precisely because they are pure intellectual concepts, they are mere thoughts. They have nothing to do with sensuality, and as such they cannot be connected with or applied to the sensual image that we perceive. Take causality. Causality, just as a concept, just a mere definition, what is causality, just says that through an A there is a B. So if A exists, then by necessity B also needs to exist. You cannot really do anything with that definition. You don't even know if the thing that is being defined here, if this causality, if that is a real thing, if that exists. And even if it existed, you don't know how you would recognize it. How would you recognize that this B is caused by A, that this B exists necessarily because A exists? Or likewise, if you go with substance and accidents, the substance is defined as that which exists on its own and not as an attribute of something else, while the accident is precisely defined as just an attribute, something which cannot exist on its own. Again, this is not something we can understand. This is not something we can work with. Which is precisely why Kant says, and again I explained it further in the lecture on the schematism, there needs to be a bridge between our perceptions, our sensual images, and these intellectual concepts like causality or substantiality. And this bridge is the schema that our power of imagination provides. The schema being sort of the method that our power of imagination uses in giving the image to our intellect to understand. The schema is produced, so to say, by filling the pure intellectual concept with the form of our viewing, which is time. Because if you add time to the concept, then it becomes something you can understand and you can apply to your perceptions, right? So again, causality as such just means because there's an A, there's a B. Now add time to that definition, and what you get, the schema of causality, is that whenever A happens in time, B must, whether immediately or whether sometime later, doesn't matter, but B must follow A by necessity. So that means B cannot happen before A, if A is the cause of B. That means B cannot happen after A just sometimes. No, it must follow by necessity. If it does, then we know that B is caused by A. Same with the concept of substance, right? I don't know what it is to mean that something exists on its own, not as an attribute of another. But if you add time to it, you get the schema of the substance, which is duration. That which has duration, so which stays through all time, never changing, never vanishing, never coming into existence, that is the substance, while that which can change is the accident, right? So if you have an object that is red and now it gets painted green, you know that red cannot be a substance because red changed in time, red changed to green. Rather, you know that the substance is precisely the object which has the color, which just changed its color. So that is our process of cognition. We need a bridge between the intellectual concepts and the sensual perceptions, and that bridge is the schema of our power of imagination. Now Kant says something kind of similar happens here in morality. We have the categorical imperative, which tells us act according to that maxim through which you can also want for it to become a universal law, which comes from our reason and therefore is entirely intellectual, has no connection to sensuality. But of course, we want to act morally in the sensual world. And we want to make moral judgments in the sensual world. We need a sort of bridge to apply it to that. But in this case, the bridge cannot be a schema of our power of imagination, because the schema is still something sensual. It may not contain sensations, it may not contain impressions, it just contains the mere form of our sensual viewing, that is time. But even our two forms of viewing, time and space, cannot be applied to the moral law. Morality is not about time and space. That is because while the categories come from the intellect, and the intellect is connected to sensuality directly, the moral law comes from reason. And reason has no connection, no immediate connection to sensuality at all. What reason is connected to is the intellect. If all of that is too complicated, I advise you to check out the lectures I gave on what is the intellect and especially on what is reason. Therefore, Kant says, here we don't have a schema provided by the power of imagination. Rather, we have a type of the moral law, as he calls it, provided by the intellect. The intellect is the faculty of rules. We understand nature, we understand the world by understanding the general rules it follows. That means that what the intellect is giving to the moral law is sort of filling it with. It's not a central form of viewing, it's not time or space, but it's just the general form of a natural law. We are to imagine the moral law, we are to imagine our own maxim that we give through our action as if it was a moral law, not just, but rather a law of nature, something that people had to follow, something that constituted a system of nature. If that is too abstract, just consider concrete examples, and I think it becomes quite clear. Let's say you are used to singing while showering. And now you ask yourself, should I actually do that? Is it moral to do that? Or might that be evil? Well, ask yourself, what if this maxim, whenever I shower, I sing, became a universal law? Use the type of the moral law and ask yourself, what if it was a law of nature? If people had to do it, if people couldn't help doing it. And then you see that, I guess as long as they are not too loud, annoying their neighbors or whatever, this could work. Such a world could work. So there's nothing particularly evil about singing under the shower. But now imagine you are asking someone for a loan. You are taking money from someone, but you decide that you will not pay it back at the date that you agreed on, but rather whenever you feel like it, or maybe not at all. And now you ask yourself if this is okay to do. Well, imagine this was a universal law. Imagine it was a law of nature, that whenever someone is loaning money, they don't pay it back in time, or they don't pay it back at all. You will find that not just can you not want such a world, because you yourself, if you were to give money to someone else, if you were to give a loan, you would of course want to be able to count on getting it back in time. But no, it's not just that you cannot want such a world, rather such a world would not even be possible. It simply wouldn't work. Because, of course, if that was the world, if that was a natural law, if everyone knew this is what's going to happen, no one would give out loans in the first place. And therefore, you could also no longer take the money and not give it back, because no one would give it to you in the first place. Doing this, taking a loan and then running away with the money, depends on the law that money is paid back in time generally being applied. It depends on the person giving money to you assuming that he will get it back when he expects it back. Otherwise, this wouldn't work, right? This goes for many evil actions, like consider theft. Theft depends on there being property. If there was no property at all, which would happen if theft became a universal natural law, right? If everyone would constantly steal, then not only would you not want that, you would not want to be stolen from, but rather it would not even be possible. If stealing was a natural law, there would no longer be property. And therefore, stealing would no longer make any sense. You only steal to make something yours. If you would assume that it would just get stolen again, why would you steal in the first place? Like, if you steal someone's car, you don't want to have to guard that car for the rest of your life. You don't want to have to always stay in that car for the rest of your life. You, as the thief, want to be able to put the car somewhere on the street and to walk away, to go sleep, and the next day you want the car that through theft you made yours to still be there, to still be yours. If you knew that the moment you stepped out of the car, the next person was gonna steal it, you would not steal it in the first place. And the person you stole it from would also not have bought that car in the first place, because you would know that it would just get stolen and so on. So that is Kant's point. It really makes no sense. It is a contradiction for this to be a universal law. And that is how you know that it is evil. Another way to understand this categorical imperative is by considering that to Kant, the human being can be looked at from two different perspectives. This is something I further explained in the lecture on the apperception on consciousness, and I advise you to check out that lecture. I said there that on the one hand, we can consider ourselves as an object of our own perception, namely our inner perception, right? To Kant, we have an outer perception, perceiving bodies in space, of course, including our own body. But we also have an inner perception, perceiving, well, what happens in our own consciousness, perceiving our own representations, our thoughts, our feelings, our desires in time. And therefore, again, we are an object of our own sensual perception. That is the sensual human being, the human being as he appears to himself, which Kant calls the Homo phaenomenon. And this is also the human being that is the object of empirical psychology, right? Empirical psychology tries to study the psyche and to better understand the human being as an object. But at the same time, there is the human being as a subject. And as the one who understands, the one who judges, the one who makes these perceptions. So when I say I am an object to myself, I perceive myself. There are two I's here, right? I, the subject, perceive an object, and this object is of course not somebody else, it is me, myself. Which is why Fichte called the human being the subject objectivity, because we are both at the same time. And this human as the subject of thinking, the one who thinks, we don't know anything about this human, Kant says, except that he's the subject, that he's the one who's thinking. Because whatever we perceive from ourselves, whatever we find in our own thoughts and our own consciousness, precisely because we perceive it, because it appears to us, is not as we are in ourselves, but rather this is how we appear. This is once again the Homo phenomenon. But the human being as a subject, as he who doesn't appear, but to whom something, including himself, appears, that is the Homo noumenon. That is the human being as a rational being, as an intelligible being, the human in himself, so to say. And he cannot be studied by empirical psychology. Rather, this human is what rational psychology, which is a subfield of metaphysics, deals with, asking what can we know about our true nature? Do we have a immaterial spiritual soul? Will this soul live on after the body dies, and so on? And in the Critique of Pure Reason, amongst other questions, Kant asks, what can this rational psychology do as a science? Can it find out anything? Can it have cognition about our soul? And he answers in the Critique of Pure Reason that no, this doesn't really work. Through theoretical reason alone, without either using experience or using practical reason, we cannot really know anything about our nature in itself. But the point is that we do have this twofold humanity, so to say. We have the Homo noumenon, the intellectual, the intelligible human, and we have the way he appears in the world, including to himself in his own consciousness, as this particular individual, as the Homo phaenomenon. Because the Homo noumenon is only one, right? As subjects, as conscious beings, we are all one and the same. Subjectivity as such, being a thinking being as such, is the same for everyone. What is different is only our sensuality. What is different, what is individual about us, is the way we appear to us, right? I appear to myself as having these thoughts and feelings. You appear to yourself as having different thoughts and feelings. But we both are a being to whom something appears. That is the same. So there's really only one Homo noumenon, and that is, so to say, our common humanity that we all share. And our differences, our individuality, are in the specific way we appear in the sensual world. Well, here, once again, as happens so often in Kant, you can find a sort of symmetry, a sort of parallelism between the different parts of his philosophy, between theoretical and practical philosophy, which I always stress, which is very important, which also means that you cannot just accept parts and dismiss other parts of Kant's thoughts, but rather you subscribe to all of it or you reject all of it. Because when it comes to cognition, Kant says it can only work by subjecting ourselves as an object, as a Homo phenomenon, as the human being who appears as this individual, to ourselves as a subject, as the Homo noumenon, as the human being who thinks and to whom this appearance appears. Likewise now, when we act, we should subject ourselves as the Homo phenomenon to ourselves as the Homo noumenon. What the categorical imperative says is that as essential as an individual human being, I should follow that maxim, so that should be my subjective principle of action, which is in accordance with the law that the Homo noumenon follows. That is the objective principle of action. Because once again, if we were pure intellectual beings, if we were just the Homo noumenon, we would always act morally. We would have no inclination to do anything immoral, because we would have no sensual drives that drive us into another direction. So basically what the categorical imperative says is act not as the Homo phenomenon, act not as just a sensual being, just an animal, but rather act as the Homo noumenon, act as a rational being. And Kant says this is also the true meaning of the ancient Greek, the ancient Apollonian being inscribed on the entrance of the Temple of Delphi, the old Greek maxim, know thyself. To Kant, this is in the end a moral maxim. It should be understood as meaning, know that you are more than just your drives, just your desires, just your lusts. Know that you are more than just this individual. This is just the way you appear in the world. This is just your outer shell, so to say. Know that you are not just an animal, not even just a clever animal, but rather know that you are a rational being and behave as such. That is what know thyself means, and that is what morality comes down to. Kant at some point makes the, I think, nicely put remark that when it comes to morality, we should consider humanity as such to be one substance only, and the individual different humans that appear in the world, so myself, Jonathan Löwer, or my neighbor, or you listening to this, we should consider them mere accidents of this one substance, which precisely means that they cannot fight each other, they cannot come in conflict with each other, because that would mean fighting yourself, right? I mean, two substances could maybe say, well, I don't care for that other substance. I don't care if it gets hurt or destroyed. I mean, simple, maybe somewhat silly example, but consider the fruits on a tree. Like one cherry could say, okay, I don't care for that other cherry. I will destroy that other cherry. But two accidents on the same substance, like the cherry is the substance. Now, one of its accidents is its color, it is red. One other accident is its taste. It is sweet. So one and the same substance, cherry, appears in the world in two different manners. It appears as red and as sweet. But both are really appearances of the same substance. So it would not make sense for the redness to say, I want to be selfish. I want only to care for myself, for the redness. And if the sweetness gets destroyed in the process, if it benefits me, if it gets me as the redness ahead to fight the sweetness, then I will do that. That would be incredibly silly. That would be, well, misunderstanding your own nature. Misunderstanding that you are not separate from the sweetness, but rather that both of you are just accidents of the same thing, of that same cherry. And in the same way, Kant says, this separation between humans, we are not different substances. This is just as it appears in this sensual world. But if we consider the intelligible world, if we consider the things in themselves, you might want to check out the lecture I gave earlier on what is the thing in itself and the appearance to understand this better, then there's really only one humanity which just happens to appear in different consciousnesses. And as a side note, as much as Kant likes to reject what he calls Schwärmerei in German, so sort of mysticism, esotericism, this comes quite close, I would say, to what basically all the mystics of all faith traditions have always said. That separation is really an illusion, that at the core of it we are really all one. Consider how the Quran says that God created us from one soul. So we are not a bunch of different souls, but in the end we are one soul only, and from that one soul come these specific different humans, which might also be the reason why the Quran says if you kill one person, it is as if you have killed all the humans. Or consider in Israelite mysticism this figure of the Adam Kadmon, the original Adam, or rather the original human, because Adam is not the name of a specific individual, but rather Adam just means human. So there was this original humanity that God created, and from it all the specific individual humans come. Again, know thyself. Know that in truth you are not just a sensual appearance, you are a rational being and behave as such. Because if you think about it, who is it who wants to do evil? Who is it who wants to murder or steal or rape? It is not the Homo noumenon. Why would he? He doesn't have any particular, any individual interests. Rather, it is just the Homo phaenomenon with his individual sensual drives who might want to do those things. As a Homo phenomenon, you might hate this person and therefore want to murder him, or you might feel lust for that person and therefore want to rape that person. But if you just abstract from this individuality, this subjectivity of yours, and ask, what do I want, not as an animal, not as someone being driven like this, but rather as a rational being? So what does reason say? Does reason really say it would be good for this person to die? It would be good for this person to be raped? Then you will not do these evil actions. That's the whole point. And again, the categorical imperative in this first version says that our maxim should be fit to be a universal law. What Kant says is that we cannot help, because we are rational beings, we cannot help but whenever we do something, to at least imply, even if we don't consciously think about it, to at least imply a maxim. I mean, unless what we do is merely done on complete reflex, right? So if you are in a dark room and suddenly intense light is turned on and you have to blink your eyes, there you might not be following a maxim, but this is just a reflex. But that aside, you're always sort of implying maxims with your actions. And whether you want to or not, the maxim that you imply with your actions always has some sort of universality. Therefore, Kant says, the evil person, the criminal, the sinner, could not really complain if he was treated the same way as he treated others, if he was treated according to his own maxim. I mean, imagine a murderer, and imagine now let's say the son or the brother or whoever of the person he murdered wants to take revenge and to kill him. And now imagine the murderer lying on the ground and the other guy pointing a gun at his face. what could the murderer say? I mean, imagine if the murderer now begged for his life. Imagine if he said, "Oh, please have mercy, don't kill me." The other person taking revenge could just reply, "You didn't have mercy on my father or on my brother, so why should I now have mercy on you?" Or if the murderer said, "Oh, please let me live, I have a wife and children," the other person could reply, "Well, so did my dad or my brother, and that didn't stop you, so why should it stop me now?" All the murderer could really do in that case is to either appeal to that person's compassion, to beg for that person to have some sort of compassion or empathy for him. But that would be outside of morality. I will address that further in a future lecture. To Kant, that is very important, that morality must be based on principles, not on mere feelings. If you act on compassion, if you don't kill somebody because you feel bad for him and because you feel his pain, that is not moral. That is something an animal might also do. Or what the murderer could say is, if he didn't want to appeal to compassion but to principles, he could only say, "Be better than me. You are right, I didn't have mercy. You are right, I didn't care that the person I killed had a wife and children. So you are right. According to my own maxim, what you are going to do to me, killing me, is okay. I cannot complain about it according to my own maxim. So I can only ask you to not treat me according to my own maxim, according to which I treated somebody else. I can only ask you to be better than me." It's really all the murderer could say here. Kant says, if someone commits evil, then if you treat him according to his own maxim, no injustice is done to him. He has no grounds for complaint. So no injustice is done to the murderer if he is murdered. No injustice is done to the liar if he is lied to. No injustice is done to the thief if he is stolen from. It would be frankly ridiculous if he complained about that. I mean, if somebody lied to you and then you lied to him, imagine him getting angry when he finds out. Imagine him complaining, "Oh, how dare you, how could you have lied to me, that was not okay." If it is not okay, then why did you do it? The moment you did it, whether you like it or not, you said that this is okay. You formulated the maxim that this is how we can treat others, that it is fine to lie to others. You cannot complain about being treated according to your own maxim. If you don't want that, you shouldn't have acted according to that maxim. Now, to be clear here, so that there are no misunderstandings, Kant is not saying that it is morally all right to treat evil people as they treated us. He is not saying that we should lie to the liar or steal from the thief. Kant says there would be no injustice done to the murderer if he was murdered. There would be no injustice done to the liar if he was lied to. But it would still be unjust as such. It would just not be unjust towards this specific person. It would be unjust towards humanity as such. Again, consider that there's this difference between the Homo phaenomenon and the Homo noumenon. The injustice would not be done against the sensual individual. He has done evil, so he cannot complain if the same evil is done to him. But the injustice would be done against humanity as such. Maybe this will be easier to understand once I talk about the second version of the categorical imperative. But I wanted to stress it here already to make sure that there's no misunderstanding. Kant is not condoning evil. He's not saying once you do evil, you necessarily lose all your human rights or whatever. But he's just saying that you, as this individual, could not complain about losing your human rights. Like a third unaffected party watching you lie to the liar or kill the murderer or whatever, he could judge you and he could say, this is not okay, be better than him. Yes, you are just doing to him what he did to you, but still you shouldn't do that, be better than that. But the evil person himself, he's not really in the position to talk like that. That's just the point. What Kant is saying is that if you are good, which just means you act according to maxims that could also become universal laws, if you are good, you can always want for others to also act according to the maxims that you are acting on. You could want for others to treat you the same way you treat them. The evil person, on the other hand, he who does wrong, cannot possibly want to be treated the same by others. I mean, we very clearly see that when it comes to the evil in the world. Just consider some political questions. Like, for example, here in German politics, it's very much dominated by the refugee question. And for years and years now, but especially in about the last year or so, people have said, no, we don't want refugees to come here. We want to close off the borders. And I have heard quite frankly, the most ridiculous and the most ignorant and absurd things. Like I've heard years ago, so when the Syrian civil war still went on, not now in the last months, after it somewhat ended, but no, when it was still, when there was still fighting, already then I've heard people say, oh, all the Syrians, they should go back to their country and rebuild their country. You, of course, don't rebuild while the bombs are still falling. That's just stupid. And I'm very sure that all these Nazis, because quite frankly, that's what they are. Like, they are racists, they should be called racists. All of them, if something happened here, like if a war broke out in Germany, if we were attacked by the Muscovite Empire, or if, I don't know, if because of the climate crisis, living conditions here would be such that not everyone could live here anymore. Like because of ongoing droughts, there would be no food or no water, or because of the North Atlantic circulation maybe breaking down, there would be a colder climate here, not allowing so many people to live here. I'm pretty sure those people would not just say, oh, okay, fine. That sucks, but I will stay where I am and die. Because I said that refugees should not come here to Germany, and they should not burden us. We should not have to pay for them. So, of course, now I don't want to burden other countries either. I'm pretty sure all those people who don't want refugees to cross the Mediterranean Sea on boats and who are perfectly fine with them droning there, they would get onto boats pretty soon if life here in Europe became impossible for some reason. And they would not want, if they cross in the other direction, they would not want the African countries to drone them, I think. Or consider the war in Ukraine. Moscovia, or as it likes to call itself, Russia, when it attacked already many years ago the Crimea and annexed it, the argument was basically that, oh, this belongs to Russia, this was Russian in the past, so it still belongs to us. the maxim here seems to be that if a country owned some territory in the past, and now that territory belongs to another state, then that state has the right to take it back, even through military violence. I don't think that this is really the maxim that Putin and that the Muscovites want to rule the world. I think if we, Germany, attacked Königsberg, or as it's now called, Kaliningrad, saying that this belongs to us, this was ours until after the Second World War, so we have the right to take it back. And I mean, if we are really going there, Germany has a much, much better claim to Königsberg, to Kant's birthplace, than Russia has to Crimea, right? Crimea only became part of the Muscovite Empire relatively recently, belonging to the Tatars, belonging to the Mongols for most of the centuries before. In ancient times being settled by Greeks. And on the other hand, Königsberg was actually founded by Germans. And Königsberg actually is in an area which was German for many, many centuries, since the Middle Ages. So if anything, Germany has a much better claim. But still, I think if we suddenly attacked it and tried to annex it, Putin would not just sit back and say, oh, okay, I would have liked to keep that territory maybe, but I do very strongly believe that every state has the right to take back territory that once belonged to it, so I'm not going to defend it. Pretty sure that wouldn't happen. So the point is, clearly he wants there to be international law. He wants there to be a rule-based world order, as it's called, where borders are fixed, where borders are respected, where his neighbors will not tomorrow, because of some claim going back decades or centuries, annex his territories. He wants that, and then he wants an exception for himself. But then, of course, he has no grounds to complain if others made the same exceptions, right? Or consider Israel and all the genocide apologists that like to drone on and on and on about how Israel has the right to defend itself, and that somehow seems to include the right to commit war crimes, the right to commit crimes against humanity, the right to kill civilians. But then, what about the right of an oppressed people to armed resistance, which is included in the same international laws, right? International law says, yes, an attacked state has the right to defend itself, but an oppressed people also has the right to defend itself. So you cannot claim international law for yourself, but then not for the other side. That makes no sense. And you also cannot say, okay, yeah, sure, they might have a right to armed resistance, but only against actual soldiers, actual combatants, not against civilians. That is, of course, true in international law, but that goes also for the right to defend yourself. That is also a right you only have against soldiers, against combatants, and not against civilians. So this makes no sense. By saying through their actions, by having these maxim, that it is okay if, let's say, you think you are defending yourself, it is okay to break all rules of war, it is okay to target civilians. They are, whether they like it or not, saying that it is okay for the other side too. They cannot complain if what they do is also done to them. And that is precisely why evil people are not just simply evil and they don't just deserve to be hated. It's not just that they cause harm to others, but rather they should be despised. They are pathetic because they contradict themselves. They are being ridiculous. You cannot do something to someone else and then whine like a little bitch when it is done to you. By doing it to others, you basically said to all the world, this is okay to do. So now at least take it, at least be a man about it when you are also punched back when you punched somebody. That's the thing. That's what makes them so despicable, that they are in clear contradiction with themselves, that they are clearly asking for special treatment, asking for exceptions. As Kant points out, no one really wants, no one can want, not even the most evil person, for, so to say, evil laws to rule the world. Everyone wants the moral law to be in charge. Everyone wants everyone else to follow the moral law. The evil person also wants everyone else to follow the moral law. The evil person also wants to not get murdered, to not get stolen from, to not get lied to. But then he has the audacity to ask for one exception for himself. And of course, this, as I already said, this is just a Homo phenomenon asking for that exception. Precisely because it makes no sense. It is not rational to ask this. So, as a rational being, you have no reason to want an exception from the universal law. It is just because of your individuality and subjectivity, because of your specific drives, that drives you towards whatever you think might benefit you, that you might demand this exception for yourself that you would not grant to others. Kant likes to compare the moral realm, the realm of freedom, to the realm of nature that is under the natural laws. And he says this is just like in nature. In nature, there can be no cause and effect of one object towards another without that other object sort of having an equally strong effect backwards. And likewise, in the moral realm, you cannot harm somebody else, you cannot do evil without implicitly allowing the same being done to you, which of course you don't want to actually allow. And so you are in contradiction with yourself. And here, once more, I want to point out the symmetry, the neat parallelism of Kant's whole thinking. Because if you think about it, this whole categorical imperative, what is it really, if not the principle of contradiction applied to the practical, applied to morality? The principle of contradiction, of course, is one of the basic principles of logic, which Kant didn't come up with, which was well known even in antiquity, which just says that something cannot be A and non-A. You cannot contradict yourself, right? I cannot say I'm alive and I'm dead, or I cannot say the t-shirt I'm wearing is red and it is blue. I cannot say 1 + 1 is 2 and then at the same time say it is 3. That makes no sense. And this logical principle that applies to our theoretical thinking, if we think the same way in the practical, in morality, what we are saying basically is our actions, or the maxims of our actions, the laws according to which we act, cannot contradict themselves. Just like it makes no sense to say there is a 4-angle triangle because then I would basically say at the same time that this object, this triangle, has the accidents of having 4 angles, and it has the accident of having 3 angles, which is clearly a contradiction. I say it is both A and non-A. Just like that, I cannot say it is okay to murder somebody, for example. When I do it, I am killing somebody, thereby implying that this is okay, that I'm allowed to do that, while at the same time saying that it is not okay to murder somebody when I'm going to be murdered or my loved ones are going to be murdered. That makes no sense. That means contradicting ourselves. And the important thing here is, we really only have one reason, right? Reason is always one and the same. There is no such thing really as theoretical reason or practical reason as, so to say, different entities, but rather it's one and the same reason that just gets applied to theoretical, to thinking about what is true or isn't, and to the practical, to thinking about what we should or shouldn't do. And precisely because of that, because there's only one reason, it always works in the same manner. And this manner is that it demands consistency. This manner is that reason, I explained that further in the lecture on what is reason. Reason is the faculty of principles, so the faculty of having a basic first principle, first statement, and from that deducing all the rest. I said in that lecture that Kant says reason is the ability to get from the general or the universal even to the particular, to the specific, right? So in mathematics, if I have a general formula like saying x plus x is 2x, then I can apply this universal rule to any specific number. I can say 1 plus 1 is 2 times 1. 2 plus 2 is 2 times 2. 100 plus 100 is 2 times 100. Just like that, when it comes to the practical, reason gives one universal law that just needs to be applied to any specific case, to any specific action, and it always needs to be applied the same. It makes no sense if x plus x is 2x, then it makes no sense to one time say 2 plus 2 is 2 times 2, but another time say 3 plus 3 is 6 times 3, or 10 times 3, or whatever. That makes no sense. That means that you contradict yourself because you have not consistently applied the same principle always. And this fact that the categorical imperative is really just a logical principle of contradiction applied to the practical, Kant doesn't quite outright say so, but I'm not the first to note it. It has been noted from Fichte to Hannah Arendt, and also it is very much implied by the architectonic of Kant's system. Here, once again, you see how important it is to really understand his architectonic. Because, and I mentioned that in the lecture on the table of categories as the key to Kant's system, Kant does say that the basic principles of logic can be understood according to the categories of relation, or according to the judgments of relation, right? Among the principles of logic, there is the principle, to this time not start from the top but from the bottom, there's the principle of the exclusion of the middle between two contradictory opposites. So that is the logic principle that says if there are two opposites that exclude one another, like being alive or being dead, or it being day or night, then there cannot be a third, meaning that if one of them is excluded, the other one must be true, right? Since there cannot be a third between being dead or alive, that means since Kant is not alive anymore, he must be dead. There is no other possibility. Or since I'm not dead currently, I must be alive. There is no other possibility. Well, this logical principle Kant connects to the disjunctive judgments, the either-or judgments that say that either something is A or it is non-A, it is B. Then, among the logical principles, there's the principle of sufficient reason, which basically just says that everything must have a reason for its existence, and if that reason is true, if that reason exists, then the thing of which that is the reason must also exist. Because that is what it means for something to be a reason and for something else to follow from that reason. And that logical principle Kant connected with the hypothetical judgments, the if-then judgments that say if A is the case, then B is the case. Well, and lastly, or rather firstly, there is the principle of contradiction, saying something cannot be A and non-A, and that Kant connects with the categorical judgments. So the judgments that just say that a predicate belongs to a subject. Just saying, for example, dogs are mammals, or my t-shirt is red. This predicate of redness or of being a mammal just belongs to the subject t-shirt or dog. With this, Kant connects the principle of contradiction, because the categorical judgment implies that if one predicate belongs to a subject, it cannot also not belong to it, right? If dogs are mammals, they cannot at the same time not be mammals. They cannot be fish or reptiles or insects or whatever. If my t-shirt is red, it cannot be blue or green or whatever, because blue or green or yellow are just so many ways of saying non-red. And it makes no sense to say this subject t-shirt has the predicate red and it doesn't have the predicate red. So, the principle of contradiction by Kant explicitly is connected to the categorical judgments. What has the very same place in his architectonic? Of course, the categorical imperative. It's in the very name, right? The categorical imperative is, so to say, a categorical judgment or categorical conclusion when it comes to how we should act. So you can see, if you follow Kant's architectonic, you discover these symmetries, these connections in a system, even if he himself doesn't outright state them. And not only is there this connection between the theoretical and the practical, both of them being basically about just not contradicting yourself, but rather there's also a connection between the way error happens and the way evil happens. You could say that evil, that a crime, that a sin is really just a practical error, according to Kant. Or you could also say it the other way around. You could say that an error in thinking, in judgment, is really just a theoretical crime, a theoretical sin. Because you might want to go back to my lecture on the critical method, because there I discussed how, according to Kant, we can make errors, how we can be wrong in our judgments. According to him, no force can ever contradict itself. I always use this example of a stone being thrown. If there was just the force of gravity, the stone would stay on the ground. If there was just your throw, the stone would forever fly in the same direction. Just because there are both forces, the gravity and the throwing force, does the stone fly for a while in a sort of half circle, in a sort of bow, and then comes down again. And the same is true for thinking, Kant says. The intellect as such cannot make errors. Also, sensuality as such cannot be wrong. It cannot be right either, because it doesn't judge at all. It just gives us impressions. But because we have both, because, so to say, the intellect is affected by our sensual impressions, that is why we can make errors of judgment. And the example I used in that lecture on the critical method was a house. If you're standing in front of a house and you see that it is painted red, you might now judge that the whole house is red. But maybe the other three sides that you are not seeing are painted in other colors. How could you make this error? If you had walked around and seen all three sides, surely you would not have thought that the house is red. So you only made this error because you forgot that you don't, the intellect might be objective, right? The intellect thinks of the house as a whole, but your sensuality is not objective. It doesn't give you the house as a whole. You can never see the whole house at the same time, but rather the sensuality, being subjective, always gives you your particular perspective. You happen to stand on this side. You happen to be viewing the house out of this perspective. So you only see one side. You see the red side, but you don't see whether the other sides are red too. When you sort of forget that, when in your judgment you don't take into account your subjectivity, your perspective, when you judge as if you had the total perspective of God, that's when you can make errors of judgment. That's when you can be wrong. Well, just the same happens when you are evil. Here too, reason as such cannot contradict itself. Reason gives the moral law, and a pure rational being like God has to follow that law because he has simply no reason to not to. But we also have our sensuality, of course. We don't just have the objective moral law, we have our subjective interests, our drives, our desires, and these might get in the way. Subjectively, I might hate that person, so I might want to murder him. Subjectively, I might lust for that woman, so I might want to rape her. Subjectively, I might be greedy for that money, so I might steal it. And only if I sort of forget that this is just my subjectivity, that this ought not to rule the world. If I forget to ask, okay, but abstracting from my subjective perspective, abstracting from my hate, for example, I feel for that person, and asking reason as such, if that person should die, then reason probably says, no, there is no reason why that person should be killed. Just because you, out of your individual perspective, happen to hate him. So the error in judgment and, so to say, the error in moral judgment, the error in action, the evil act, happen for the same reason, because we don't abstract enough from our subjectivity, from our sensuality, because we don't judge or we don't act as just rational beings. And this means it is really about Aufklärung. I will talk about what exactly Aufklärung means to Kant at a later point, but much later, just in the next year. There's still much else to talk about first. But Aufklärung is usually associated just with thinking for yourself, which, of course, that is what it is about, but people understand this thinking for yourself in the most superficial manner. They think, oh, I don't follow what somebody else tells me, I question what the mainstream media tells me, therefore I think for myself. But thinking for yourself, the way Kant understands it, is not just about not letting other people think for you. It is also, or even mainly, about not being a slave to your own sensuality, not letting your own sensuality, so not letting the nature inside you determine and guide your thinking. You must become independent not just from other humans, but you must become independent from nature. You must become independent from your own sensuality. Of course, not independent in completely rejecting it, completely letting go of it. We need, of course, sensuality and the data that it gives us, both for our understanding the world and also for our acting in the world. But it should not rule over us. And the subjective perspective it gives us should not distort our objective judgment. Which means that a fully aufklärt person could neither be wrong nor could he do evil, which of course must not be misunderstood. He will not be God, he will not be all-knowing, or he will not be holy. That means that certain things he won't know, even if he's aufklärt, but he will rather make no judgment at all than make a wrong judgment. He will stand before the house and realize, well, I do only see one side. I don't see the other side, so I cannot judge the color of the house. I can just say, this side is red. The other sides might also be red. They might also have another color. Until I've seen them, I will refrain from judging. And likewise, when it comes to acting, we might not become so holy as to not have temptations. I might still say, I hate that person, I wish he would die. Or I'm so hungry, I want to take all the food for myself, even if the other person I'm stuck with here will starve. But we will refrain, if we are aufklärt, if we are independent from our senses, we will refrain from acting on that. And that is what morality is all about to Kant. And before I close this off, there's one more important point I want to address. I want to address a common criticism of Kant's moral philosophy of the categorical imperative, because it often gets criticized for its formalism, for being a merely formal moral principle. And to be sure, it is that. If you think about it, all other moral principles are material. That is, they are about the contents of our actions. They tell us what to do or what not to do. They tell us, you shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not be a false witness. Or they tell us let's say in the case of utilitarianism, always bring about the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, or always prevent the greatest pain for the greatest number of people. So they tell us materially what to do. Kant's moral principle doesn't do that. It also tells us what to do, of course, but it only tells us what form our action should have, not what content it should have. If you think about it, the categorical imperative doesn't say do not kill, do not steal, do not rape, whatever. It only says do not contradict yourself. It only says act in such a manner that your action has a lawful form. That's really the genius thing about it, that Kant says basically the categorical imperative is a moral law that only has itself as a content. It just says act in a lawful manner. Act in a way that your action has a form that could qualify to become a law. Act lawful is the only moral law there is. Meaning that the evil acts, such as murdering or raping or stealing or whatever, they are not evil as such. If it was possible to kill someone without contradicting yourself, if it was possible to kill someone according to a maxim that could become a universal law, then that killing would not be evil. It would therefore be morally allowed. But the point is, of course, that there is no way to murder someone that could qualify for a universal law. So, sure, murder is forbidden, but not because the categorical imperative as such says you shall not kill, only because it says you shall not contradict yourself. You shall only act in a lawful form, and the lawful form just so happens to not allow killing. That is what is special about Kant's moral principle, indeed, that it is just formal, not material. But I would argue that this is not a weakness of Kant's moral principle. On the contrary, that is precisely its strength. That is what makes it not just better, but rather what makes it the only moral principle there really is. First of all, nothing but a formal principle is to be expected within the framework of Kant's philosophy. That is precisely how he solves the conflict between empiricism and rationalism. I discussed that in the lecture on the foundation of morality. There I said that according to Kant, since all our cognition is either empirical through experience or rational through thinking, if you want to lay the foundation for morality, it could also only be done on these two ways. I explained in that lecture that the empiricism of morality has the issue that, yes, it might give us certain material instructions, like you should do this, you shouldn't do that, maybe because you feel compassion, because it would make you happier, or because it is the law of the land, or the customs of your society, or whatever. But this can never be the foundation of a truly universal and a truly necessary law. It can never be the foundation of moral duty. It can at best be advice about what would make us happy. And as I explained in that lecture, actual morality should have these two qualities. It should be universal and it should be necessary. And those qualities can only come out of reason. That is why Kant is a rationalist of morality, to be sure. But the problem he has with other sorts of moral rationalism, with the dogmatic objective rationalism, is that they too try to formulate material morality that tells us what to do. Right? I explained in that lecture that there's the outer rationalism that bases morality on God, saying do whatever God tells you. And there's the inner rationalism that bases morality on the concept of perfection. Perfect yourself. Do whatever would be a perfect action. Both are material principles, and that is precisely why they don't work. The big discovery that is at the basis of Kant's philosophy, of Kant's whole critical project, is that yes, we do have these two faculties. We have our sensuality and we have our intellectuality. I explained that further in the lecture on these two, the lecture on the thing in itself and the appearance. What Kant says is that sensuality is receptiveness. So we are sensual beings when we are being affected, when we are receiving some sort of impression, some sort of impulse from something. And on the other hand, intellectuality is spontaneity, which Kant translates as self-activeness. So we are intellectual when we are producing something out of ourselves, not because we were caused to produce it, caused to bring it forth by being affected in some way, but rather we ourselves bring it forth. Well, and then Kant says our mind has these three faculties: the faculty of cognition, the feeling of pleasure and displeasure, and the desiring faculty. And all three of them have a sensual and have an intellectual side. And I mean, the whole project of the critique of reason, of Kant's three main works, is basically examining the intellectual side, examining how much can we know or what can we produce out of thinking alone, without empirical data, without our sensuality. And the discovery, the red thread that runs through all of his works, is that Kant says everything material, so all the content, comes from the senses. And all that thinking does not produce anything new as such, any new content. All that thinking does is connecting the content that the senses give to it, give to the intellect. And connecting things means bringing them into a specific form. So Kant says all the material comes from the senses and all the form comes from thinking. And it cannot be any other way. No form can come out of the senses and no material can come out of the thinking, at least for beings such as we are. A pure intellectual being, God, may be able to produce new material out of his thinking, but we can only really connect, only really give a form to the material that our senses give us. So that means that when it comes to the faculty of cognition, all the matter of our cognition comes from the senses. through our sensations, through our impressions, the colors, the tastes, the smells, the sounds, and so on. And all our intellect does with its concepts is giving them a form. For example, with the concept of causality, connecting perceptions and turning them into experience, right? So the example was that if I have the perception that a stone is hot, and I have the perception of the sun shining on that stone, that is the material. That as such is just various perceptions disconnected from one another that don't allow me to make experience. Now my intellect, with its concept of causality, can connect them, can say there's a rule at work here. The sun shining on the stone is what caused the stone to be warm. And this allows me to make experience. Now I learned something. I learned that the sun is hot, that it warms things. I can use that experience. I can apply it in a technical, practical manner. I can, for example, put my wet laundry out into the sun to dry. The point is that the form, the connection, is not taken from experience. We may think so. We may think that we perceive causality, but we don't. When one billiard ball hits the second and the second walls away, we don't see that the second walls away because of the first. Just like when we touch the stone and feel that it is hot, we don't feel that it is hot because of the sun. This connection, this form, is what we make ourselves with our intellect. But the whole point in the critique of pure reason is that while we perceive no forms, we perceive only matter, only content, we can, on the other hand, think no matter, no content. We can only think forms, which is why in our thinking we cannot rise above nature, above the realm of experience. We cannot, as the dogmatic metaphysicians before Kant thought, know anything about God or the immortality of the soul or free will, because thinking alone cannot lead to new cognitions. Thinking can only connect that which the senses give us. The same was true for the feeling of pleasure and displeasure. The content, the actual feeling of pleasure, comes through our senses, comes through our vital sense being affected in some manner, and us having this feeling of our vitality being strengthened, our vitality growing. I talked about that in the lecture on pleasure and pain. But we can give a form to it. In the beautiful and the sublime, our power of judgment judges that which our senses show us, these impressions we have, that they have a specific form, a shape, a play in space or time. And that form, when it is beautiful, is a form that our power of judgment finds purposive to itself. And we judge that this must be true for any being which is like ourselves, which has the same manner of cognition, which is sensual and intellectual. We judge that to all these beings, this form must be purposive and therefore must bring pleasure. Well, and now when it comes to the faculty of desiring, the same is true. Kant says all material desires, so desiring something specific, desiring this or that, comes through the senses. As a sensual being, I have hunger and want to eat something, or I have libido and want to have sex or whatever. And my intellectuality cannot produce new desires as such. Which means that if you demand a material morality, a morality that tells you what you ought to desire, what you materially should do, what your goals, your purposes should be, then that could only be an empirical morality. And that is no morality at all, because it could never be universal or necessary. So the rationalists are right to reject empirical morality, but they are wrong to still try to formulate a material morality, to still try to tell us what we should do. No, Kant says, our senses, so to say, tell us what we should do. They compel us to want certain things. And all that reason does is give our essential desires a specific form. The form of lawfulness, the form of freedom being a law to itself, freedom being in concord with itself, freedom not contradicting itself. So basically, the moral law says keep following your senses, keep doing whatever you desire, but only under one condition, only within a lawful form. So if you are hungry, you may eat, but you may not steal the food. If you're horny, you may have sex, but you may not rape. So still, what we actually desire to do comes from the senses, the material of our actions. But the manner in which we go about it, the form of our actions, that comes from reason. That is the point Kant makes. And that is how it really has to be within his system. Because that is basically his discovery, that matter comes from the senses, form comes from intellectuality. One of them, they cannot change places. So the senses cannot give form, intellectuality cannot give matter. Now, why is this a strength and not a weakness? Because, first off, I already said in previous lectures, I already said in the lecture on the foundation of morality, that all other moral principles besides Kant's, there are 4 other basic principles, have the issue of what is actually the morality grounded in. Why should you actually act morally? And all these other principles, all these material principles, as it now turns out they are all based on heteronomy. They are all based on the principle of eudaimonism, so the principle of happiness. They all, in the end, cannot give us an obligation. They can only give us promises or threats. They can only say, do the good action that this moral principle says is good, because it would benefit you, or because the opposite would harm you, right? So the outer empirism can say, do good, otherwise you will be punished for breaking the law, or you will be socially ostracized. The inner empiricism can say, do good, then you will feel more happy. Act on your compassion, otherwise you will feel bad at seeing others suffer or whatever. The outer rationalism can say, do good, then you will please God and maybe go to heaven. And if you do evil, you will go to hell. And the inner rationalism can say, do good, then you will be perfect. Otherwise, you will be imperfect. You will not be as you should be. And I mean, all of that could be questioned anyway. Like, for example, someone could say, I don't believe in God, so I don't believe that I go to heaven or to hell depending on how I act. But even if we accept this causal connection, we could still say, okay, but this is not a moral duty. This is just an advice of prudence, and I don't want to follow it for whatever reasons. Maybe I think I can get away with it. Like, maybe I think I can break the law in this instance and not be caught and therefore not be punished. Admittedly, the outer rationalism has a somewhat stronger case because it would be hard to escape God since he is all-knowing. But even here, maybe I think I can get away with it. Maybe I think God will have mercy on me. Maybe I think if I just pray enough or sacrifice or whatever, I can make up for my evil action. And on the other hand, maybe I don't get away with it, but maybe I'm fine with that. Maybe I don't want to be happy. Maybe something else matters more to me. Maybe I hate this person so much I want to murder him, even if I do get caught and go to prison. Maybe I say that's worth it. Maybe I say even hell is worth it. I'm prepared for eternal suffering. All these material principles of morality tell me specifically what to do, and therefore they need to give me an additional reason why I should do it. Kant's formal moral principle, precisely because it does not tell me what to do, but only how to act, does not need to give me an additional reason. It is just reason itself demanding consistency from itself, telling itself I ought to act in a manner that doesn't self-contradict. I can do whatever my drives may drive me towards, just as long as it happens within the universal form of lawfulness. Also, the other issue is that these material moral principles, not only do they have a problem giving a reason for the because, I mean, they all basically say this X is good, because it is good, you should do it. They cannot really give a reason for the because. As I said, I could say, okay, maybe you are right, maybe it is good, but I still don't want to do it. But also, they cannot really give a reason for the good either. They cannot really say why this would be good. They just claim it would be good. I mean, the moral principle, like, let's say in utilitarianism, you're just told, create the greatest happiness for the greatest number, prevent the greatest pain for the greatest number. Why? Why is happiness a good in itself? Why is it better that many people feel happy and less people suffer? Why is not the opposite better? You cannot really give a reason for that. I mean, sure, if I ask the people, they might say so. They might say, I would rather be happy than suffer, but that doesn't make it good. And I mean, when utilitarianism tells you it is better that more people are happy than fewer, so if it comes to that, better sacrifice one person for the happiness of many. I'm sure if I ask that one person that is gonna be sacrificed, he's gonna have a different opinion. He's not gonna say, yeah, sure, it is objectively better that more people are happy rather than just me, so sacrifice me. But rather he's probably gonna say, better sacrifice the more. I don't care if it's millions or billions that are gonna be happy. I would rather be happy myself, even if they all have to die. So the core issue here is, and that is something that lots of people don't get when it comes to moral theory. And that's also why lots of people don't get why Kant's moral theory solves the problem, because they don't get the problem. It is usually assumed, even by philosophers, that in morality you have to start from what is good. You have to say this X is good. And then from that you derive what you should do. This is good, therefore it should be done, therefore it should be realized. This seems like a natural sort of reasoning in morality. So it seems that we just need to find a reason for why this is good. We just need to find out what is good. But for Kant, it's the other way around. He doesn't say this is good, therefore you should do this action which leads to this good, but rather he says you should do this action. Therefore, what it leads to must be good. Kant doesn't start with the good in morality, he ends with it. Maybe to make this more clear, let me use an analogy of Fichte's. Fichte at some point says it is as if we are drawing a line and we can draw the line in two ways, right? Either I can have a certain coordinate, a certain specific point, and I draw my line to reach that point. So my goal is set first and the line comes second. Or, on the other hand, I could decide to draw the line in a specific angle. I don't care what points it goes through. I just say I want to draw a line in a specific angle. For example, I want to draw a line in 90 degrees and not in 45 degrees or in 20 degrees. It should be 90 degrees. By taking this specific angle, the line will necessarily pass through a number of points, through an infinite number of points. And it will not pass through other points that would have been in another direction, that it would only have passed with another angle. But the line doesn't pass those points because I wanted to pass through them from the start. The line doesn't pass those points because I made them my goal and I decided to draw the line towards that specific point, but rather the line just happens to pass that point because the point happens to be in that direction. And that would be the difference. And when you do the first thing, when you just set your goal on a point and just say, I want to reach it, first off, there's the question, why would you specifically want this point? But second, there's also the issue that a lot of morality has, that people start thinking the end justifies the means. If I just want to get to the point, I can draw my line however I want, right? It doesn't have to be a straight line. I can draw circles and loops and whatever, just as long as I happen to reach the point in the end. So this can lead people to think that it is okay to do evil in order to achieve a greater good, right? That is exactly what utilitarianism preaches. If the goal is happiness, then it suddenly becomes okay to cause unhappiness, to cause pain, to sacrifice certain people and their happiness, just as long as if at the end of it, I'm bound to reach greater happiness. But if, on the other hand, I say from the start, I want to draw a straight line in this certain direction, in this angle, in 90 degrees, then it can only be a straight 90-degree line. And whatever points it will pass, it will pass. But the points, so to say, were not the point. And again, this is something that many struggle to understand, including scholars, but I would argue just because of their unaufklärdness. If you are unaufklärt, if you are, well, a slave to your senses, if you're always driven by something else, never driving yourself, then you do not understand how an action as such has value. No actions have value to you then. All actions just become means to an end. And that end, that purpose of the action, is again a means to another end. Like such an unaufklärt person goes to work maybe every day, but not because of the work as such. Maybe he hates the work, maybe he sees no point, no sense in that work, but he works in order to get money. And again, why does he want to have money? Not just to have money as such, but to buy things with it. Let's say he wants to pay rent. And why does he want to pay rent? Not to pay rent as such, but because he wants to rather live in a home than live on the street. And precisely because we don't do these things for themselves, but just to reach some goal, we would also be fine with not doing them if we could reach the goal with some other means. Like if that person who just works to get money would get money some other way, if he were to win the lottery, let's say, he would maybe stop working. Or if that person just wants money to pay the rent, well, if suddenly the landlord said, oh, you don't need to pay me rent anymore, I will let you live for free here, then maybe he would stop working and making money. Because the unaufklärt person doesn't care about the action as such, he only cares about the end result. And if you ask him, why do you care about this end result specifically, not another, why is this your goal? It comes down to heteronomy, not autonomy. He can only say, because this is my desire, this is what my senses ask for. Like, why would you rather have a home than live on the street? Just because that feels better. Because it's more comfortable to sleep in a bed than sleep under some bridge. But the unaufklärt person, the rational person, the person who governs and who leads himself, the autonomous person, the moral person, is not just fixated on goals for reaching which any means is okay for him, and which goals have been given to him by nature or by society or whatever, but rather the aufklärt person can find value in an action as such. He can do an action for its own sake, not because it leads to something which is good, or which he thinks might be good, but rather because he understands that the action as such should be done. And that will then lead to him necessarily thinking of the result of that action as being something good. Like the moral law in me, my reason tells me that I mustn't kill others. On the contrary, I must save them if I can. I must have regard or reverence for other people's lives. So if I dislike someone, I still am not allowed to murder them. And on the other hand, if I see someone having an accident, I have to run over there and try to save him. The moral law doesn't tell me that a person being alive as such is good. It just tells me that I ought not to kill and that I ought, on the other hand, to help those in danger. But since it does tell me that I'm not allowed to kill, that this is a bad action, and that I have to help the person in danger, that this is a good action, I cannot help but reach the conclusion that the purpose of that action, that which this action necessarily leads to, that is human life is a good thing. Again, since I draw my line in a certain degree, I cannot help but the line pass through a certain point, even if I didn't draw the line just to reach toward that point. And that's Kant's revolution in practical philosophy. That is how he turned everything from its head onto its feet. No longer do we start from being told this is good, therefore you should do it, but rather we tell ourselves this we should do, therefore it must be good. And with that, I'm at the end of the first version of the categorical imperative. I hope it is also clear now why it is connected to the first category of quantity, that is the category of unity. Because after all, the categorical imperative in the practical, just like the principle of contradiction in the theoretical, is about us having unity with ourselves, right? It is about the unity of the rule according to which we act. That rule being such in its form that it could serve as a natural law because it doesn't contradict itself. And it is about, therefore, the unity of the Homo phaenomenon with the Homo noumenon. As I said, we should consider ourselves just as not disconnected from one another, disconnected substances, but just as accidents of one and the same substance, of one and the same humanity. As I said, there are also two more versions of the categorical imperative that don't lead to different actions, that don't lead to different things that we should or shouldn't do, that don't contradict this first version, but that can be very helpful in further understanding what morality is about, and that I want to address in my next lectures. My deep thanks be to my supporters, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.